Chapter 4, the last chapter of the book of Ruth, ובועז עלה השער וישב שם. Boaz, meanwhile, had gone to the gate and sat down there. Here in this last parak, last chapter of the book of Ruth, Boaz meets the other potential redeemer. As we said, either Ploni Almoni or Tob at the gate of the city. In a way, Ploni Almoni expressed interest in buying Elimelech's property, Elimelech's land. He declined to marry Ruth. So as much as he wanted to redeem the property, but not Ruth. So consequently, Boaz, the elder of the city, with his witness, fulfilled his promise to marry Ruth and to redeem the name of the soul of Elimelech, Machron and Kilion property. So the chapter here starts with the idea that Boaz ala ashar, Boaz had gone to the gate and sat down there. So we learn from this pasuk, from this sentence, that Boaz, in a way, was like his great-great-great-father, Nachshon. Remember we talked about Nachshon, the first person to walk into the Red Sea, as God miraculously split the water during the time of the Yetziat Mitzrayim, the Exodus from Egypt. And his great-grandson, HaMelech David, King David, was the man of action. So in a way, you see a continuation between Nachshon, Boaz, and later David. As soon as the morning broke, Boaz set out for the gate of the city to fulfill the promise that he had made to Ruth, which is to find the other redeemer and settle once for all which one of the two of them will redeem Naomi, daughter-in-law. So you may ask a question: why in the world Boaz feel duty-bound to take such immediate action? He can postpone it, he can say all kind of reasons why not. But the fact that Ruth had come to him in the middle of the night and lay down at his feet was, in a way, an indication that of the separate straits in which she and Naomi found themselves. And because of the urgent, it was incumbent upon Boaz. Boaz was a leader, a God-fearing man, a community leader, and a judge to concur with his fellow judges to resolve the future of Ruth. So they said, Vayeshev Sham. He said the language of Vayeshev, it's usually get together the court, in our language, the rabbinical court, and he said there. So they said, Vehineh plon vineh goel over. So how come all of a sudden the Redeemer was spoken, passed by? The Midrash said that it was not by coincidence, it was planned by Hashem. It was in a way, a divine plan. And we learn from that first and foremost, the behavior of a person must put forward his or her best efforts. The outcome, however, is in the hand of the Almighty. So the gate of the city, they said, Allah Hashar, he said there in the gate of the city. It's important for you to know, especially those who visited Israel very few times or never visited Israel. Bethlehem is a very important place. I just came back from Bethlehem. I had the privilege to pray at the Kever Rachel, at the gravesite of our mother Rachel. So Bethlehem, not just nowadays, but in ancient time, was an important city. And this we know because the city had a gate, meaning that it was a walls and fortified. And in those days, the Mefarshim, the commentators said that all the important business was conducted at the city gate. It was the city of the marketplace and the court. So in a way, Elimelech lived there, but now Boaz was said to have been a judge, and some said the chief judge of Bethlehem, as some portion said. So it was very natural for him to sit at the city gate, and Boaz knew that he will find the elders of the city, the people who, the wise men who sit in the court, and that will be witness his meeting with the Ploni Almoni, and later his marriage to Ruth. So, in a sense, the idea that Ploni Almoni passed by, it's hard to believe that it was coincidence. It was the divine plan. And some commentators say that Boaz was not only set at the gate of the city, await the other redeemer, but actually converted, convened a special meeting with the other judges of Bethlehem in order to settle Ruth's fate. In other words, he wants to make sure that Ruth has a bright future, not the way that she suffers so much in the meantime. In general, just a side comment, when they use the word here, Hasha'ar, the gate of the city, the Torah tells us in the Chumash Dvarim, in the book of Deuteronomy, it's an important phrase in chapter 25. They said that it's a concept we call chalitza. It's a procedure, the steps that a childish woman must follow in her deceased husband, brother, does not wish to marry her, which is a situation that he refused to give her a yibum, a levirate marriage, and therefore need to take off the shoes and all this ceremony. So here the verse 7 said that first she is to go to the gate of the city, to the elders. So there are many other references in the Tanach to the gate of the city. You see it in the story of Abraham and Lot, you see it in many places, in Proverbs. So when faces such a difficult situation, a true leader rises to the occasion, and the final outcome, however, is in God's hands. So in a sense you can say that a miracle occurred, as the Boaz and his fellow judges sat together to discuss Ruth's future. Out of the blue, the other redeemer just came in, Ploni Almoni, and walked by. You may ask, so what happened? Is that Ploni Almoni aware that Naomi and Ruth had returned from Moab several months before? Some commentators believe that he was aware of Naomi and Ruth's presence in Bethlehem. Other commentators did not believe that he was aware. So, in a sense, was Ploni Almoni aware that he was the closer redeemer? It's a question. Some believe that he was absolutely ignorant of the fact that he was the closest redeemer, the whole child of the family. While other commentators believe no, that he was intentionally ignoring Naomi and Ruth because it was not in his intent to marry Ruth. To get a property, yes, but not to marry Ruth. If you remember, we discussed earlier in chapter 3 that some said that Ploni Almoni's name was really Tov, because Boaz said, "Imi galech Tov, Yigal," if Tov redeem you, fine. So it's a question if his name was Ploni Almoni or Tov. But Tov in Hebrew meaning good, right? So here in chapter 4, the first verse, we see here that he's referred to simply as a Ploni Almoni. Ploni Almoni in Hebrew, you can say it's like so-and-so, Mr. So-and-so. So if his name was Tov, why is it called Ploni Almoni here? And the answer is the closest relative to Elimelech and his sons, Ploni Almoni had an obligation, in a way, to help Ruth, to redeem Ruth. But he had not stepped forward to do it. And in a way, Shmuel HaNavi, the prophet Samuel, who wrote the book of Ruth, felt that he was not even referred to by a name, which is it's a deep lesson for all of us, to all of those who not come forward to do the right thing for other people. So he called him Ploni Almoni. Others, however, say that the prophet Samuel, who wrote the book of Ruth, did not want to shame the Redeemer, and so did not refer him by the real name. But the many said that Ploni Almoni is just a general term in the Hebrew language. People use to this very day the word Ploni Almoni to anonymous, which is unknown. Rashi, however, the great Rashi, dealt here, and I would like to share with you the word of Rashi here. Rashi, when he says, Shvako Ploni Almoni, he said to him, come over, sit down here, Ploni Almoni. So Rashi said here, Almoni means widowed, which which is Ploni Almoni, according to Rashi, was a widower from Jewish law. Rashi said, and translated, he should have known the recently idea, the adjusted law that Moabite women could convert to Judaism, although Moabite men were prohibited from doing so. So apparently he was unfamiliar with it. So Rashi said here, the word, I guess to translate the Rashi, the word Almoni also referred to the word Ilen, which means to be stuck down or to mute. So Rashi said here that Ploni Almoni kept silent and not come forward to inquire about Ruth and Naomi's well-being or offer help to them in any way. So according to this Rashi, perhaps Ploni Almoni is derived from the word Pele, which means hidden or covered. The great Rabbi Levush, the Malbim, says that in a way it is impossible to know why Ploni Almoni rejected the mitzvah of redeeming Ruth. It's not clear, so Malbim was basically left with the question. So again, the sages say that it was a miracle that Ploni Almoni walked by the gate as Boaz was meeting with his fellow judges to discuss Naomi and Ruth's situation. Others say that Ploni Almoni has been summoned to the meeting, so if it was summoned to the meeting, why Boaz calling Ploni Almoni, not referring him by his name? So in a way, you can say that Ploni Almoni was successfully ignored Naomi and Ruth to this point. Even he said it's a little bit cruel. He clearly was unhappy about being summoned to appear before the elders of the Bethlehem. And Boaz, therefore, diversity referred to him as Ploni Almoni. Okay, so we said here, Vayasa Vayeshev. So he said, he come over and sit down here, so and so, and come over and sit down. So why is it necessary to say that Ploni Almoni came over and sat down? Now, if you look carefully at the chart in the Ruth talk in my book, the way that we distribute, Ploni Almoni was Boaz's uncle. So in a sense, he was the closest relative, yet he deferred to Boaz, waiting for Boaz's instructions to sit, and then waiting while Boaz assembled the other elders of the city. So that's the reason why he behaved like that. And then the next pasuk, the verse 2, tells us that Boaz took 10 elders of the town and said, be seated here, and they sat down. Why he gathered a quorum of 10? So Boaz gathered, the rabbis tell us, gathered 10 men to witness the events that were about to occur. Here is the Ploni Almoni, and Ploni Almoni making a decision about redeeming the property that Naomi was offering for sale, and the marriage of Ruth to be redeemed. So either by Ploni Almoni or by Boaz. So imagine the situation. They are at the court. Boaz makes the arduous effort to get the 10 people around there, and it's all big fuss over that. And now they have to pick and choose. The closest relative is Ploni Almoni on top, and then the second one in kin is Boaz. Now, the next pasuk said, pasuk bet, they said, Vayikach 10 anashim. He then took 10 men of the elder of the city. So, like Ploni Almoni, the elders of the city deferred to Boaz, head of the court, and waited until he was seated before they sitting down. So that's the idea that they're waiting for him to sit. By the way, I assume you noticed they used to hear the pasuk 10 anashim. What is the significance of the 10 people? So we learn from the book of Ruth that the presence of quorum in a certain court decision or a certain situation is required for the recitation of the marital benedictions. When you officiate wedding, you know that you need to have a minyan, you need to have 10 people participate. That's the way it should be. And additionally, the presence of the 10 elders was required here to, in a way, publicly confirm the law allowing a Moabite woman to enter into a community of Israel as a convert. Because again, it wasn't clear, we said it in the early lecture, it was not clear that the prohibition of the Torah against marrying Ammonite and Moabite apply solely for men and not for women. So now the next pasuk said, Vayomer lagoel. So as a judge and one of the leaders of his generation, Boaz gathered these 10 men, and you can ask, so how come he needed 10 men, by the way? He can take himself as the 10th, and he gathered 9 people. So some rabbis hold that Boaz had a personal stake in the outcome of their decision. So that's the top proper behavior of a judge. He rescued himself, further testament to his righteousness, and want to be super objective in that manner. Now, after Boaz gathered together and convened the quorum of 10 elders, he turned to Ploni Almoni and said, that's the next pasuk, Naomi, now returned from the country of Moab, must sell the piece of land which belonged to our kinsman Elimelech. And then in verse 4, Boaz continued, I thought I should disclose the matter to you and say, acquired in the presence of those seated here, and the presence of the elder of my people. If you are willing to redeem it, redeem. But if you're not redeemed, tell me, and our men may know, for there is no one to redeem but you, and I come after you. So the question is, why did Boaz use the word kne, acquire, or buy, and ge'al, redeem? So Boaz wanted to make sure that Ploni Almoni understood that this was a two-part transaction, which is involving, number one, the sale of the property, number two, the redemption of Ruth, and one connected to the other. You cannot take one part without the other. So Boaz believed that Ploni Almoni would agree to the purchase of the property, or to redeem the property, and that belonged to originally the house of Naomi, the house of Elimelech. However, he was not sure that Ploni Almoni would agree to the next step, which is marrying Ruth. So here you see another important distinction should be drawn between the word kne and ge'al. One who makes the purchase is looking for the best possible price. One who redeems does not have, the reason that he redeemed is a member of the family and might even be willing to pay more than the regular asking price. So you can translate the word, use the word, V'ani amarti agaleo l'azdecha lemor. He said, if you will do it, fine. If not, use the word, you must sell kne. The word written here in a very unclear way, so we have to say that Naomi was not already sold the property. What she had done was put the matter into the hands of the court, which Boaz was the head. So if the property was not redeemed in the family, it would have been sold to an outsider. So that was the other option. If neither Ploni Almoni nor Boaz would be involved with this. So you read here the response of Ploni Almoni. After it was all big to do, he called upon him, or he came by coincidence, and he sat there, and he's the court, the 10 people, and he gave the proposal about the property. And then he said to him, but this condition to rule. So Ploni Almoni responded, he said that he will redeem the property, he would love to redeem the property, it's beautiful. So as soon as Ploni Almoni agreed to redeem the Naomi properties, Boaz informed him of the condition attached to the transactions, which is, he stipulated here in Apostle K, in the sentence 5, he says, when you acquire the property from Naomi and from Ruth the Moabite, you must also acquire the wife of the deceased, so as to perpetuate the name of the deceased upon his estate. So again, this is a tricky business. It's one condition to the other. It's not just to getting the property or the whatever the estates involved here, but so here Ploni Almoni disagreed with that condition. He right away responded in sentence 6. Then I cannot redeem it for myself, lest I impair my own estate. So why you refuse to marry such a beautiful woman as Ruth? Or was he concerned about money or the cost of the supporting a wife or other matters? What's the story? Why Ploni Almoni refused? So the rabbis tells us they try to take all the commentators from Malbim to Alshech to all the other great commentators. They said that Ploni Almoni may have been eager to get the deal done when they developed the property, but he could not envision the prospect of a new bride. There's several explanations. One, they said because of the issue of polygamy. In one hand, in those days, polygamy clearly was accepted in the ancient world, not only Jewish, but in this sense, in the ancient Jewish world for sure. But according to some sages, Ploni Almoni was already married and had children from his wife, so he may have been afraid of hurting or angering his wife, or creating a friction between man and his children. So that's the reason why he refused. In other words, some sages judge him favorably. They say he was afraid of his wife, he was afraid of his children. Others say that he was uncomfortable with another, or he just rejected her, whatever it is. The other sages say that Ploni Almoni believed that Machlon Mikilyon had died as a punishment for marrying Moabite women, and he feared that he would be suffered the same fate. So there's another opinion why he rejected this option. Rashi said here that Ploni Almoni believed, and just translating the word in Rashi, he said here that Jewish men were forbidden to marry Moabite women, even those who had converted to Judaism as Ruth. So though he did not fear for himself, he was concerned about any children he and Ruth might have, that they will be disqualified from receiving an inheritance and be treated as outcasts in the community. So again, you see here another way of interpretation why Rashi feels here the reason that Ploni Almoni rejected. You can take it easily positively or negatively, but we can learn a lot of lessons in life when it's come to do an act of kindness, a chesed. You can see here who are your real people you can count on, or who are your real friends, etc. When people go out of their way to do things like Boaz versus selfishness. So again, you can take the reaction of Ploni Almoni in many different ways. By the way, while we're talking about polygamy, it's important to know that the Jewish approach to polygamy changed. The 10th century Ashkenazi legal authority, his name is Rabbi Gershom ben Yehuda, is credited to the prohibition against polygamy, mainly in Ashkenazi. The practice of husband having more than one wife could lead, according to Rabbi Gershom's view, especially in those days, to terrible marital discourse. Even we have in the Torah many examples of Abraham and his wife Sarah and Hagar, and Jacob and his wife Rachel, etc. Rabbi Gershom's goal was to simplify and harmonize family life. So that's the reason why he prohibited it. It was especially the time of the plight of Jews in the Christian society that prohibited polygamy. So we have to remember that among the Sephardim, the Sephardic Jews, the Eastern Jews, polygamy was an accepted practice until the middle of the 20th century. So it's important to know. Okay, Pasuk Zayin. Now it's important statement. V'zot lefanim Yisrael. Now it's just making a clear statement. The verse 7 outlines the long-standing procedure in Israel for the redemption of property. So they said as follows: V'zot lefanim Yisrael. The Redeemer will remove his shoe and hand it to the person from whom he was redeeming the property. This seals the legal transfer of property. So Boaz removed his shoe and handed it to Ploni Almoni. In a sense, Ploni Almoni here needs to do which we call chalitza. And it's a big question if we need chalitza or not, because it wasn't the brother, but still he wants to act upon rejecting her and giving the chance to someone else to take over. So sometimes readers mistakenly confuse the transfer of or acquisition of property in Hebrew kinyan, described in the book of Ruth, with chalitza. So let's talk a word or two about Chalitza ceremony. What is Chalitza ceremony? We have the Torah law, the biblical law, the law that we discussed earlier, the Levirate marriage. The Torah said in Deuteronomy 25. It's called in Hebrew Yibum. The Yibum requires that a man marry his childless brother's widow in order to perpetuate his deceased brother's name. If the man refuses to marry his sister-in-law, then we have the process of the Chalitza ceremony. We described it a little bit in chapter 2. And the widow takes the shoe worn specifically for the occasion and called the Chalitza shoe, and from her brother-in-law's foot, and spit on the ground in front of him, a public display of the contempt in which she holds him for his refusal to marry her and have children together. So this ceremony is rarely performed today, but it's still possible and be performed in a situation like that. Unfortunately, I saw in early years in the situation when the soldiers, young soldiers get killed in the war, and the sister, the brother, the single brother, refused to marry, and he needs to have a chalitza. So why did Boaz hand his shoe to Ploni Almoni and not to Naomi or Ruth? Since in that sense Elimelech's property belonged to them. So the rabbi said that rather than the actual transfer of property, what been described here is the right to transfer property, which Ploni Almoni is relinquishing in favor of Boaz. So next, what they do, Vayomer Boaz Lazkenim, is in the next pasuk. Boaz proclaimed to all the people in the city, Eidim atem, you are witness today that I am acquiring from Naomi all that belonged to Elimelech and all that belonged to Machlon and Kilion, by fulfilling the mitzvah of redemption in the presence of the elders of the cities. Boaz restored Naomi and Ruth honor before the town people of Bethlehem. So here, Boaz goes to the next steps. Again, let's trace the steps. He promised Ruth. He followed his promise. Came the next day. Didn't wait like court case for weeks or months. He gathered together the 10 people. They sat around the court. He told them to sit. All of a sudden, the Ploni Almoni passed by, either by mistake or he was called upon. Ploni Almoni gave the option. He agreed to redeem the property. The minute he heard that this involved also taking Ruth, he rejected that, either selfishly or personal reason or whatever it is. Then, upon rejecting it, then Boaz gave him the shoe to do the act of chalitza. So this was not all that Boaz said before the many people gathered here. He also declared, read the pasuk clearly here, because they said in the sentence stands, and I translated, he said here, "V'gam et Ruth Moabiyah, eshet machlon kariti li liisha." I'm also acquiring Ruth the Moabite. In other words, Boaz said to the court, I'm not only court of other people. He's not part of the 10. So I'm not only acquired the property is not mine. Anyway, he was a wealthy man. He says, I'm also acquiring Ruth the Moabite, the wife of Machlon, as my wife, so as, that's the key, to perpetuate the name of the deceased upon his estate, that the name of the deceased may not disappear from among his kinsmen and from the gate of his hometown. You are witness today. So he makes it very clear, and he shows really act of kindness, act of unselfishness, altruistic act. Why, by the way, Boaz declared twice, once in verse 9, one verse 10, you are witness today. So the Malbim tells us, the great Malbim, Meir Levush, said that Boaz gathered two groups of witnesses. The first to witness his purchase of the land, and the second witness his marriage to Ruth. In a sense, you can say that he's taking a chance to marry Ruth, because many will say that marrying Ruth was a risky thing to do. Her first husband has died, right? Number one. Number two, what happened to Ploni Almoni was afraid to marry her. and her Moabite origins could present political difficulties for a new husband, especially as a judge. But Boaz's willingness to marry Ruth exemplifies his faith and his strength, and is a role model to this very day. And then, what the President Boaz said by marrying Ruth, the marriage of Ruth, a Moabite convert to Judaism, was the first sanctioned by the leaders of the Jewish people. The fact that Boaz and Ruth's marriage took place before so many witnesses removed any doubt about the validity and the legitimacy. The issue arose again, as we said in the early lecture, when King David before he became king. Now in verse 9, we said Boaz reversed the order of the name. He said first the Machlon, and first the Kilion, and then the Machlon, to emphasize his legal claim over the property that had belonged to Elimelech, Kilion Machlon. So less Orpah or any other descendants bring claim for a share of Kilion estates. In other words, he's not taking just small part of the estate, he's taking the entire estate that belonged to the deceased, Elimelech, Kilion and Machlon. Everyone now is taking. Orpah rejected, Naomi in a sense is out, so he's taking the entire property and Ruth. So he used the name here in the Pasuk 9, and he said, Kaniti, I'm acquiring. So acquiring is referring to Naomi property, and in a sense to Ruth. So what does that mean? So in Hebrew, the word kana, to acquire, is used for the action of taking a wife in a biblical sense, as well as the acquiring property. In Jewish law, the wife is regarded as a beloved and honored partner in the sacred task of building a home and raising a family. And Boaz for sure had, the text shows us, a tremendous respect for Ruth, and certainly did not consider her his property, but that was why he mentioned the acquisition of Naomi's property apart from taking Ruth as his wife. Now, since we're running out of time, I just give you the abbreviation that the town people offer Boaz 3 blessings. A strong marriage, a prosperous future, and despite his age, he should marry children, and that's what they said to him in the Pasuk Yud Aleph in sentences 11-12, and they said, we are witness, may the Lord make the women who come into your house, that which is said under the chuppah these days, like the matriarchs, Rachel and Leah, both of whom build the house of Israel, prosper in Ephraim, and perpetuate the name in Beit Lechem, and may your house be like the house of Peretz and Tamar, both to Yehudah, to the offspring which the Lord will give you by this young woman. So you see here the very famous statement that they use many times, especially at the wedding. Let me skip some point because running out of time. I just want to go to the very end of the last psukim here. They said here that he had a child, and they called him Obed. So Naomi had lived through the death of her husband and sons, and the degradation of her reputation in Beit Lechem. And by the end of the book of Ruth, her reputation was restored, her life renewed with the birth of Obed, and her family legacy assured. Now, the rabbis tell us that Ruth also rewarded. For her great piety and kindness, Ruth was rewarded. There's several Rashim which said that she had a secure future, and her son Obed, the promise of one of her descendants, will be the Redeemer of Israel, the kingdom of peace, which was King David. So we learn many lessons from the book of Ruth. We learn the idea here, especially the end, that what Shmuel and the prophet Samuel tried to say, that he wants to erase the doubt in any mind about the King David being lynched and claim to his throne. Number one, the lesson of the person sometimes go to a great tragedies and setbacks in their lives, as Boaz did. Yet God had a plan for each of them and does not just let it go. You see the situation, how everything turned around and how everything turned for good. So many lessons we learn from this book of Ruth, but one of the important lessons is the idea that God is always with us. God is always there for a person regardless of the situation. Even something looks like there's no hope. Ruth is a good example. Someone that really has no way, no hope, then God appear in hell. And it ends by the statement of all this important lineage goes from the parents, the son of Judah and Tamar, Chetzron, Ram, Aminadab, Nachshon. Remember we talked about him, the guy that jumped to the water. And then we have Salmon, Boaz, Obed, Jesse, Yishai, and the last word of the Megillah is Yishai who needed David. David HaMelech, King David, that born and died in the festival of Shavuot. And it's important to note when it's come to mitzvot in the Torah, Ruth the Chidah, the great Rabbi Chaim David Azulai said, the truth in the Gematria, in numerical value, it's Reish, Vav, and Taf. It's 606. And we have 613 commandments. The 7 Noachide laws that apply as universal law for Jews and non-Jews, that 7 Noachide laws apply to the difference between before Ruth and after Ruth. In a sense, it's like a little esoteric. You have 7 Noachide laws that apply to everyone, and then you have in that sense the Ruth, the Chidah said, the addition of 606 mitzvot that Ruth accept upon herself, and then she have the whole Taryag, 613 mitzvot. May Hashem help us that these important lessons, many lessons we learn from the book of Ruth, and again, you're welcome to study, not only from my book, Ruth Talk, but all the sources we study together. Hashem help us to continue our learning, to learn the lesson of life, from the life of King David, from the life of Ruth, Naomi, and all these characters to our times, how important it is to be in the faith in Hashem, faith in God, believe in the, what we call Messianic era, believe in the Mashiach. May he come speedily soon in our days, and let us respond. Amen. Thank you.